When you were 7, a single summer went on so long you forgot September was a real place. There was time enough to memorize the pattern of light on a particular wall in the late afternoon, to find out which branch in which tree would hold your weight and which would not, to learn the exact smell of your neighbor's yard after the sprinklers ran, the particular way the pavement held heat until after dark. The summer had rooms in it. It had weather systems, it had geography you could walk. And somewhere at the far edge of it, September existed the way foreign countries existed, theoretically and very far away. This is not nostalgia softening the truth. It is not memory improving childhood in the rear view. What you remember about that summer is real. The time was long. The days arrived one at a time, each one distinct from the last. And at some point in your adult life, you noticed that the days had stopped arriving that way. They began to arrive in handfuls. Sometime in your 40s or 50s, you may have had the experience of watching a decade go by as though you had stepped out of the room for a moment and returned to find it gone. The decade didn't disappear. It just happened. You lived every day of it. Looking back at it now, the whole span compresses to something closer to an impression than a record. And the question that comes with that compression is usually quiet and carries a small weight. Where did it go? Here is the answer. The time did not go anywhere. The clock on the wall ran at exactly the same rate in 1975 that it runs today. What changed was not the time. What changed was the instrument you used to measure it. The time didn't go anywhere. Your brain did. Now I want to be precise about what that means, because there is a version of this idea that is partially right and a version that reaches the real mechanism, and the difference matters. The partial version says, we get busier as adults, more scheduled, more distracted, with fewer pauses to notice the world going by. So we lose track of it. There is something real in this. Marc Wittmann at the Institute for Frontier Areas of Psychology in Freiburg, Germany, and Sandra Lehnhoff surveyed 499 people ranging in age from 14 to 94, and they found that felt time speed does correlate with busyness and time pressure, not just with age alone. So yes, busyness is part of the picture, but busyness is just the surface. It is downstream of something older and more structural. To find the real mechanism, you have to follow William James backward into the 19th century. James published The Principles of Psychology in 1890, and in the 15th chapter on the perception of time, he wrote what I think is one of the quietly extraordinary observations in all of psychological literature. He wrote, "The foreshortening of the years as we grow older is due to the monotony of memory's content and the consequent simplification of the backward-glancing view." Ponder that for a moment. He is not talking about how time feels while you are living it, moment to moment. He is talking about what happens when you look back. When we judge the length of a past period of our lives, we do not consult the clock. We do not recall duration directly. We weigh the memories, we survey the landscape of what we remember, and we use its density as our ruler. A stretch of time that laid down dense, distinct, recoverable memories reads as long in retrospect. A stretch of time that passed in routine, that required no new learning, that generated no new landmarks, compresses to almost nothing in the backward-glancing view. It simplifies, it foreshortens. Childhood is wall-to-wall novelty. Almost everything happening to a 7-year-old is a first. The first time you understood that a shadow could move. The first time you registered that adults sometimes said things they did not mean. The first time you experienced the specific disorientation of waking in an unfamiliar room. Every one of those encounters was new information, and the brain wrote it down. The summer was dense with content. And so the summer, reviewed from this distance, holds up under inspection. There is so much to find there. Adulthood automates. The 1011th morning commute runs on a different rail than the first one. The brain that routed your attention so completely through that first commute, cataloguing intersections and timing and the exact pitch of the train noise, has long since handed the whole operation over to habit. It arrives, it releases the moment. The time happened, the record is thin. The evidence for this mechanism comes from an unexpected direction. In 2007, neuroscientist David Eagleman at Baylor College of Medicine, working with Chess Stetson and Matthew Fiesta, dropped volunteers off a 150-foot platform into a net below. The fall lasted approximately 2.5 seconds. Afterwards, subjects were asked to estimate how long the fall had taken. They overestimated it by around 36%, most placing it closer to 3.5 seconds than 2.5. And Eagleman's interpretation was not that fear had literally slowed time. A separate part of the experiment gave the game away. Subjects wore a wrist display showing numbers flickering faster than normal perception, and they could not read those numbers during the fall. They were not processing the world at an accelerated rate. What happened was that fear forced the brain into a state of full attention and full encoding. Every fraction of a second got written down with unusual completeness. When the subjects looked back at the fall, they found a dense record. A dense record reads as a long interval. The fall felt longer because more of it was remembered. Hold that for a moment. It will do most of the work here. The Reminiscence Bump is the other piece. David Rubin at Duke University and other researchers studying autobiographical memory have found a consistent pattern. When adults over 40 are asked to recall memories freely, a disproportionate share of those memories come from roughly ages 15 to 30. That stretch of life looms largest in recollection, regardless of how long ago it was. And the current best explanation is the same mechanism at work. Those were the years of highest novelty density. First love, first real job, first apartment, first city you chose to live in by yourself. The brain was encoding at its highest rate, the record is thick, and the memories hold. If that were the whole story, it would already be worth knowing. But James considered a second idea alongside his own, and his handling of it is as honest as anything in the chapter. Paul Janet, a French philosopher, proposed in 1877 what is now called the proportional theory of time. His observation was this: a year is 1/10 of a 10-year-old's total life experience. It is 1/50th of a 50-year-old's. If felt duration is proportional to the fraction of total life lived, then each additional year must feel shorter than the last, in a ratio that follows the math directly. There is something elegant about this, almost satisfying. The older you are, the smaller each new year is as a fraction of the accumulated whole, and the fraction reads as smaller because it is smaller. James found the theory beautiful. He also found it insufficient. He wrote that Janet's ratio, while descriptive, was probably too simple to be the elementary cause. The proportional frame captures the shape of the phenomenon. It names the pattern. But naming a pattern is not the same as explaining it. The mechanism, the reason the ratio produces felt compression, is still the memory account. Janet gives you the arithmetic, James gives you the biology. The two ideas are not in conflict, they converge. The proportional framing gives you the mathematical shape. The novelty and density account gives you the underlying reason the shape exists. Together they arrive at the same place. The years feel shorter because they are smoother, and they are smoother because they are full of things your brain already knows how to do. Now here is where I want to introduce some honest numbers. Because the phenomenon is real, but the research gives it smaller dimensions than most people expect. Wittmann and Lehnhoff, in their 499-person survey, found that felt time speed does increase with age. The correlation is real and it replicates, but the effect size was small to moderate. Age accounted for at most around 10% of the variance in felt speed, and for short durations, a single week, a month, even a year, the age effect barely appeared at all. The phenomenon emerged mainly at long horizons, looking back across a decade or more, and it peaked in their data around age 50. What this means is worth sitting with for a moment. The feeling of acceleration is not a steady compression that begins the day you turn 30 and tightens decade by decade until your 80s. It is a long horizon, retrospective illusion, mostly about the difference between how a decade of childhood reads in memory and how a recent decade reads. In the present moment, the clock is running at exactly the same rate it always has. There are other proposals worth naming, with the evidence they actually have. One is the dopaminergic internal clock. The brain keeps time partly through a system of pacemakers and accumulators that runs on dopamine. Aging affects dopamine transmission, making the internal timing system noisier and more variable. A 2016 review in Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience examined this connection carefully. The mechanism is plausible, and the connection to aging is real, but whether aging-related changes in dopamine make subjective time feel faster or slower is genuinely debated among time perception researchers. The direction is not settled. It is interesting, and it is not yet an answer. There is also what physicist Adrian Beijan at Duke University proposed in 2019 in the journal European Review. His argument begins with eye movements. Adults make roughly 3 to 5 saccades per second, each fixation lasting around 200 to 300 milliseconds. These rapid movements are what deliver fresh frames of visual information to the brain. Beijan's argument: as visual processing slows with age, fewer new frames arrive per unit of real time, and the mind has fewer distinct moments to count. He called it the old movie effect. A projector running slower means fewer frames, and the film feels compressed. The saccade data itself is solid. The leap from saccade rate to felt time compression is Beijan's own proposal, and it has been met with skepticism from other time perception researchers. It may be partly right. It is a physicist's hypothesis about a psychological phenomenon, and it should be held accordingly. And there is forward telescoping, which William Friedman and Steve Jansen described in Acta Psychologica in 2010. Remote events tend to feel more recent than they actually were. This is likely the origin of the specific experience of thinking. Has it really been 10 years? The answer is yes, and the brain cannot locate the event precisely because the record is thin on detail, and events without strong detail cluster closer to the present than they belong. Not a separate mechanism so much as a consequence of the same one. The years with fewer stored memories are also harder to locate in time. Here is what I find most interesting when all of this resolves together. The years feel short because they were smooth, and they were smooth because they were full of things your brain already knew how to do. This is not a failure, it is what it looks like when expertise takes hold. The metabolic cost of memory formation is real, and the brain does not spend that cost on the 1011th repetition of something it has already learned. It spends it on the first. Efficiency is the right word for what the brain is doing. The years that read as thin were being managed well, not wasted. But efficiency has a texture in memory, and the texture is thin. Novelty is what memory keeps. The first time your eyes adapted from brilliant summer sun to a cool, dark room. The first morning in a city you'd chosen on your own. The first real winter, or the first real loss, or the first time you understood what you were actually afraid of. The brain wrote those down, in dense ink, and those sections of your life hold up under retrospective inspection. The The sections that feel like they slipped by are not absent. They happened. They are simply written in lighter strokes. When you were 7, a single summer went on so long you forgot September was a real place. That summer is still there, held exactly as you remember it, in the density of the record your brain kept. The time didn't go anywhere. You were writing it down every afternoon, and you didn't know you were doing it because you were 7, and that was simply what everything felt like. The time didn't go anywhere. You wrote it down.